India does have one of the biggest education systems in the whole wide world, right? We almost have around 25 crore children in our schooling system. There are still almost more than 70% kids in grade 3 who are not able to read a grade 2 level story. Technology can play a really pivotal role in improving the learning outcomes for the children. We do see now smartphone penetration in the country improving. More than 70% kids are spending more than 30 minutes on their parents' smartphone. So there is a role for the technology to play and help improve learning outcomes. CSF has partnered with Shikha Academy to build an AI teacher coach known as Sakhi. So can we get the teacher to just record the audio of her class, and through that audio recording being fed into AI, can we give really simple feedback to the teacher on certain teaching practices that she's doing in her classroom to guide what is that she's doing really well and what is it that she can do better, right? So
Welcome to the Learning Circle, the ultimate video podcast for educators and parents who want to unleash the full potential of children. Join us as we explore the fascinating world of learning with the help of thought leaders who will share their knowledge and stories with us. This is your host Kavleen Kaur, and I'm excited to take you on this journey. Get ready to be inspired, informed, and entertained. India is now the EdTech powerhouse. We have 15,000 EdTech startups in India. Yet, millions of Indian children are struggling to read in grade 3. Millions of teachers are struggling in their classrooms with 40 plus children, each with different learning levels and probably at different grade levels too. We have lots of parents who have access to a smartphone but don't know how to use it for their child's learning. So, why do we have this gap between innovation and impact? And how to bridge this gap so that technology is aligned with the everyday realities of a classroom? Today, we are discussing this important topic. My guest today is Abhimanyu Maheshwari, Senior Project Lead EdTech at Central Square Foundation. He and his team is making sure that technology is accessible to each and every child in India. Abhimanyu, welcome to the Learning Circle.
thank you, Kavli.
Before we talk about CSF's belief that technology is key for learning gains for all children, help me understand what is the ground reality of the schools in India. Take us to a typical government school or a low fee private school and help us understand what we will see there.
So India does have one of the biggest education systems in the whole wide world, right? We almost have around 25 crore children in our schooling system as of recent data. Almost 50% of these kids are in early grades, primary grades. We have around 15 lakh schools across the country. Almost 10 lakh of these are either government schools or government aided schools. And then we, of course, have private schools. And a major chunk of these private schools are what are called the low cost private schools, which have a smallish fee as compared to the higher income private schools. The Right to Education Act solved for the access problem, right? Where almost it mandated that there's right for education for kids in the age group of 6 to 14. And it also sort of mandated having a school within a kilometer of the child's. India almost has most of its children now enrolled in the school systems, right? However, while that has been solved for, the learning levels within these schools remain fairly low, right? And this is sort of seen across multiple data points. We have World Bank report which calls out more than 50% of kids in grade 5 not being able to read a grade 2 level story. The recent assessment 2024 data shows that there have been progress, and we see these green shoots of progress from the learning levels having been improved from what they were during the COVID time. There are still almost more than 70% kids in grade 3 who are not able to read a grade 2 level story. More than 50% kids in grade 5 who are not able to read grade 2 level story. So the quality of education and the learning levels remain low. And so what this translates into is when you walk into a typical government school, what we'll see is that there are multi-grade, multi-level classrooms. A teacher has a set of kids who would across multiple grade levels, across multiple learning levels within her classroom. The classrooms might lack basic infrastructure at times. Because of that, the teacher is overburdened with the number of kids she's managing. There's, of course, multiple other responsibilities that the teacher has in terms of various kinds of admin tasks that the teacher is assigned to at at any point of time, they're also pulled into election duties and a bunch of other things that the teacher has to go through. There's also the pressure on the teacher to complete the syllabus within a limited time period. And hence, what that does is there's very limited time for the teacher to do extra remediation or individual student support. So the teacher doesn't have much time for that. Rote learning remains still a dominant form of instruction within the schools. In better resource schools, you will find a print rich environment and access to technology where there would be, let's say, a digital classroom with a screen in the classroom, or in some schools even a digital lab, the computer lab, as so to say. However, those again remain low as compared to in terms of when you look at access to those across the spectrum of government schools. So hence, in some ways, there's a plethora of these systemic challenges, right? In some ways, which contribute to the low learning levels that we see. But that also brings into the point that technology can play a really pivotal role in improving the learning outcomes for the children, right? And I think as we see the access to technology improving, we do see now smartphone penetration in the country improving through our own data and multiple other data points. We see more and more we are moving towards a universal smartphone penetration where at least one shared device being available at the household level. Data in India is one of the cheapest, as we know, across the world. And we do know that children are spending time on their parents' smartphone, right? Through our own CSF's own Bharat survey for EdTech, we know more than 70% kids are spending more than 30 minutes on their parents' smartphone. So there is a role for the technology to play and help improve these student learning outcomes. The new education policy 2020 that came out does call out technology as a very important role in teaching learning, puts it into the center of classroom in terms of what is happening in the classroom and how can technology almost aid everything that's going on within these classrooms to help further improve this impact.
Right. But what is the ground reality of the teachers' acceptance with the respect to technology? Do they have hope that technology will improve learning and also take care of their load, or there is hesitation, or there is fatigue from all those plethora of options available?
Teachers are, of course, using technology. I think COVID played a big role across, right? I think in terms of just getting teachers, parents, students to start using technology. And I think so a lot of the schools we'll go to now, teachers also will have, most of the teachers will have one smartphone with them, right? And most of them have these WhatsApp groups within their school, within their classrooms, which they use to communicate with their parents on a day-to-day basis. There are a bunch of apps from the state side that the teacher uses to monitor progress and input sort of administrative data as well, right? So they are quite well versed and they are using technology. However, having said that, there are questions and hesitation when it comes to using technology as well, right? Most in times in terms of where is that data being shared with, right? Who's looking at that data? More and more so with AI coming into the picture, there's also the question of, and they know their kids are using AI, and at times there are question of, will this replace me or will my kids know more than me, right? So there are those questions that do remain, right? There is no systemic data available in terms of teacher sentiment towards the use of technology. However, through our own field visits, we do see teachers being receptive towards using technology for the purpose of teaching and learning, right? However, in some ways, the technology has to almost aid in terms of what they're doing and not add to the workload in some ways, right? And I think it's almost the role of technology has to be how does it sort of integrate into their daily routine and makes it very easy and intuitive for them to use some of these things rather than sort of it being a additional task that they need to do. So I think that's how we see the role of technology there. I think from our side, what we're doing is sort of our next version of Bharat Survey for EdTech, we are having a section specifically to even go to teachers and sort of ask them questions about their perception for technology. So we should have more data on this soon as well once we launch the next version of Bharat Survey for EdTech.
Oh, that is wonderful that going to the teachers and actually taking their sentimental connect with technology, because like you said, technology has to help them, not add to their burden. And right now there may be mixed feelings. So the survey would give us better picture. And now coming to the parents, what is the sentiment at the parental side? Are they aware that these learning apps are there? Are they open to use that? Or is there some hesitation?
Yeah, so on the parent side, again, I think through our own data points, we do know that there is a majority of parents that are aware about now technology supporting and can help in learning. However, I think what we do see is that because the kids are first generational learners, right? So a lot of the parents, and what we hear on the ground is that they don't feel, or they don't feel confident enough to support their child in their learning, right? And I think what that translates into is that while kids are spending time on parents' smartphone, doing mainly YouTube, parents are also hesitant to provide access to these phones to the kids because of various reasons, like in terms of screen time, in terms of cyber fraud, in terms of just them looking at inappropriate content, right? A lot of our partners work towards almost capacity building these parents and almost guiding them in terms of how can they help be more engaged with their child's learning, right? Because there are multiple research reports across the globe which point out that the more a parent is involved in the child's learning, the better the chances of improved student learning outcomes, right? So, and we do see a lot of our partners work with parents on almost even work with the child through very simple household material available at home to guide them on some certain mathematical concepts or even some social emotional learning concepts, right? And almost build capacity of their parents. And in some ways, parents then becoming a very important learning agent in their child's learning journey in some ways, right? So I think we do see more and more edtech solutions working towards that, and parents sort of, as they become part of these programs and they start seeing their child learning through the use of technology, then the probability of them giving the access to the device as well and sort of supporting the child learning through technology just improving through that.
Helping parents build their capacity to help the child is, I think, a wonderful route to reach the child and give some learning gains there. So we have talked about the sort of the demand side of this, that the smartphones are available, the parents are also being trained on how to guide their children, the teachers are also hopeful of technology, and there is a lot of work being done to train them. Now, if we go to the other end of the spectrum and see the edtechs, we have 15,000 edtech startups, and as of the last data that we have, only 1% of them, maybe even lesser than that, are working on foundational literacy and numeracy. So why do we have this gap? We have the demand, we have the resources available, but we don't have these edtechs coming up to provide their solutions for foundational literacy and numeracy.
No, that's completely rightly pointed out by you. I think we have a large, the India's edtech ecosystem is really vibrant, right? And we have a large number of edtech organizations, as you pointed out as well. But a predominant majority of those are focused on test prep or competitive exams or even catered towards middle or higher income, right? Middle and higher income groups. And the rationale for that is that's where the paying capacity is, and that's where the market sort of the revenues are in some ways for some of these organizations, right? I think what we do see, at least on the primary side of things, especially for underserved segments, is that the willingness to pay is something that is yet to be explored, right? A lot of these parents are sending their kids either to the government schools or these low cost private schools, as we mentioned. And they also do end up sending kids to tuitions outside of these schools, right? And these are tuitions within the community. So that's where the parents are looking to send their child. And in some ways, their willingness to pay for an edtech solution is something which is not completely identified as of yet, right? I think from a policy perspective, also, when you see as part of Samagra Siksha budgets, currently from a policy perspective also, there are budgets available for grade 6 and above for procurement of technology or for having any technology be incorporated into the school as well, right? And so there are no budgets available from a policy perspective also for primary grades in that sense, right? And hence, in some ways, just the role that philanthropy and non-profits need to play currently to almost drive this supply, right? So as you correctly mentioned, there are very few organizations who are working on the foundational literacy and numeracy side of things. And that's one of the roles that CSF is also trying to do, is almost work on the supply to improve and get a supply of high quality, pedagogically sound and contextually relevant edtech solutions focused on foundational literacy and numeracy skills. And in some ways, philanthropy's role here almost guiding to build a high quality supply and build a strong body of evidence through this supply to then potentially in the near future also drive policy changes and get some of those budgets unlocked, right? I think that is in some ways what would drive even the supply to then start sort of moving the needle here, right? And we have seen this happen in the middle school side of things on personalized adaptive learning solutions, right? So again, on the personalized adaptive learning solutions, CSF has worked over the years on sort of contextualizing a bunch of personalized adaptive learning solutions like MindSpark. CSF also supported the setting up of Khan Academy in India, right? And what we see the shift there now is that almost with one state looking at procuring personalized adaptive learning part of their EdTech strategy to now almost 6 to 7 states demanding that, right? And I think, and that's where we see the now with the budgets being getting unlocked for personalized adaptive learning. So I think we do see that shift happen now more and more on the middle school side of things. And I think for the FLN side of things, I think we'll just have to walk that journey through with some of these partners to work on building a good supply and then also working on the evidence side of things to then potentially get more budgets unlocked, and that again moving the needle on the supply side more as well. CSF has been working with almost more than 8 EdTech partners over the last couple of years as well. And these are partners who are enabling learning on foundational literacy and numeracy skills. So we ran an EdTech accelerator as part of a Lifted Accelerator, which was supported by a group of philanthropic organizations. And sort of as part of that, we were able to work with 8 EdTech partners to drive some of these skills. And currently this was being done, which was enabling learning at home, right? Given again, the access to infrastructure within the schools is fairly limited. However, some of these models also were teacher directed, where the teacher could assign activities which were aligned to what they were teaching in their classroom as part of the foundational literacy and numeracy curriculums. And that activity then being done by the child on their parent's smartphone at home.
Oh, wonderful. So we have established that access to technology is there, and now with CSF support, edtechs are coming up and providing solutions for the FLN as well. And if I talk about the edtech environment, the ecosystem in India, what is your view about it? Is it even innovative but uneven, or is it, I would not say unresponsive, but slow to respond to the needs of the FLN and lower income group? And how would you describe the edtech ecosystem in India?
Yeah, so as I said, I think it's a very vibrant ecosystem, right? I think overall there is a lot of promise in there. I think, of course, it went through a boom during COVID times, and it's been a journey there, right? But I think overall, at least for EdTech, for when I look at for underserved segments, I would say it's promising but uneven in some ways, right? I think through our own work, I think we are now starting to see early stages of evidence also coming out in terms of EdTech being able to move the needle on student learning outcomes. And I think through that, there is more and more wider acceptance and optimism as well, right? But having said that, there's still a lot of work that needs to go into driving further salience with stakeholders, with government on adoption of EdTech. And I think the point is in terms of how do we work on that and make sure that we are able to integrate EdTech in an equitable manner to democratize quality of learning for each child in the country, and sort of have EdTech support and supplement the work that's happening within the classrooms to really move the needle on improving the student learning outcomes.
Right. So, thank you for helping us understand the ground reality. So, given this entire ecosystem, CSF is working, you and your team, and of course, a lot of other people in the CSF, they are working to provide access to learning for all students in India, right from FLN to middle to high school. So, now help us understand what is the philosophy and approach of CSF with respect to technology being used for learning aids.
CSF as an organization sort of believes in system-led reform approach, right? Even in work, which I'm sure my colleague Anustu would also have spoken to you about, it's a similar kind of approach that we take on the EdTech side of things as well, right? And I think our work on the EdTech side focuses on largely 4 pillars in some ways. The first pillar here is on the shaping of supply side, right? And I briefly mentioned it in my earlier question as well, where the idea is that we work on building a supply of high quality, pedagogically sound, contextually relevant EdTech solutions, which are aligned to the curriculum within the schools and almost are built towards the need of parents, teachers, students from underserved segments, right? So that's the supply shaping side of our work, where as part of that, as I was mentioning, we even ran an EdTech accelerator over the last 2 years, and we're working with almost more than 8 EdTech partners on the foundational literacy and numeracy side of things. Historically, we have worked with personalized adaptive learning solutions as well, contextualizing solutions like MindSpark, Khan Academy, as I mentioned, setting them up in India. So really working on the personalized adaptive learning solutions. We have also focused on teacher-facing products which are focused on teacher professional development over the past years, right? The second pillar of our work is on evidence generation, right? So again, as you would imagine, there are as many people who are excited with EdTech, but there are as many people who are also skeptics of EdTech, right? And I think there's very little body of evidence within the country in terms of what works for EdTech, and even further lower body of evidence in terms of what works for EdTech for low income segments in some ways. The second pillar of our work focuses on setting up research studies in partnership with researchers, both from universities in India, but even outside of India, or even with evaluation agencies like JPAL or DIL, to set up quasi experimental studies like DID or RCT, and almost work with the portfolio of solutions that we have to prove efficacy of these solutions, both from a product side, but then also from a programmatic side. The third pillar of our work is on driving adoption, where we work with state governments on building salience for adoption of EdTech, for sort of looking at the procuring of the evidence-backed use cases of EdTech, and then also supporting them with the implementation of these policies and programs as they look to procure. And the final pillar of our work in some ways is on public goods, where again the idea is to look at CSF being as a ecosystem enabler, looking at white spaces in the ecosystem where we see some gaps existing, and almost looking at how can we plug those gaps in by creation of some public goods, right? And a couple of examples of these are the Bharat survey for EdTech, which I briefly alluded to earlier, where there was no survey in the country which captured data on adoption of EdTech, the perception with EdTech. So that's a survey which CSF did in 2022 across 6 states and with 6,000 households to collect this information. And now we are in the process of rolling the second version of that, in which we also aim to capture teachers' voice as well as the perception with AI coming into the picture as well. Another example of a public good that we have built is EdTech TULNA, which was created in partnership with IIT Bombay, which is a framework to evaluate the design quality of the product design quality of EdTechs across the spectrum of technology, content, and pedagogy, and to almost inform what good EdTechs looks like, and almost coming up with a framework for that. So those are the 4 pillars of our work.
Oh, that is very wonderful to know that CSF has this four-pronged approach where you work on, number one, ensuring that the right edtech solutions are being created, and then measuring their impact, their usefulness, also help with the adoption of these developed and measured edtech solutions. And then finally, if there is a gap somewhere where a new product is needed, CSF team is also helping develop those products. So I think the entire spectrum is being covered here, and I would like to go into each pillar in detail, starting with the supply, the development of these edtech solutions. So in one of our conversations, you were talking about software known as Chimple. So tell us this Chimple story, and also that I think CSF has reached about 5 million plus children. And when we see 5 million is just a number here, but we are talking about individual students there. That also gives us an idea of the impact of the CSF we have here in India. So help us understand this product Chimple and also other products that you would like to talk about.
Yeah, no. So I'll sort of give a brief of in terms of how does this portfolio work, right? So again, as you alluded to, we sort of were able to reach a scale of more than 5 million children through a portfolio of 8 solutions as part of our accelerator work. And these solutions are working with different models, right? So there are solutions which are direct to consumer, your B2C solutions, which reach the end beneficiary through target, and through that they're able to reach the consumers, and they're available on the Play Store, and that's how they work. There are solutions which are following the government adoption pathway, where the idea is to partner with government at the district level or at the state level and use the government school body to drive adoption, and almost have teacher be there as the learning agent, where teacher is either sort of assigning certain activities or even nudging the child to do these learning activities at home on their parent's smartphone. And then we also have a model which is community driven, where the idea is that there are community volunteers that are placed within the community who sort of go and sort of drive adoption with the end user and get parents to get onboarded onto the product. So again, it's a diverse portfolio of a mix of for-profit, non-profit organizations, and also a diverse mix of models here, right? In terms of how they are reaching the end beneficiary. We also have a diverse mix of the product types, right? Again, so we have products which are WhatsApp based, products which are working on WhatsApp as part of WhatsApp groups, where content is sent out on these WhatsApp groups on a daily basis, and they're able to track engagement that happens on these WhatsApp groups to almost understand how children are learning. We of course have apps that are available, and almost a guided learning journey being designed by these apps in terms of how they can get the child to learn at home through support with parents, right? So that's the plethora of products in some ways. And again, for each sort of model, there would be nuance in terms of how they'll sort of look at the entire product funnel, right from adoption to onboarding the user to almost getting the user to engage on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, and almost retaining the user over the long term, right? And again, there is a bunch of work that goes into almost building certain nudges, rewards, incentives, which drives this entire product funnel, right? To almost make sure that the child is coming back to the product, learning on the product, staying on the product, and sort of engaging with the product, right? Given the learning here is happening at home in some ways. So that's how it completely works, right? And an example of this is in some ways Chimple that you mentioned, right? So Chimple again is a product that 5 years ago, right? So Chimple, how it came into being was that Chimple was part of the one of the finalists of the Global Learning X Prize competition. So this was a competition which happened in Tanzania. It was also funded, co-funded by Elon Musk at that point in time, where Chimple was part of almost 5 learning solutions and one of the finalists there, where it showed learning gains as part of that program, right? And it was initially built in Swahili. So CSF then partnered up with Chimple way back in 2019 to almost contextualize it for India and get them to work in India. Chimple was launched then during the COVID times as a B2C product where it was available on the Play Store and the users could download and use it, right? However, in the initial journey, we saw that the time that the user spent on it was fairly low, right? And in terms of engagement and retention, there was certain gaps that we were seeing, and that brought into picture the product being anchored on a learning agent in some ways, right? So then Chimple went ahead and built a teacher-facing module as well, a teacher-facing app, and also dashboards that the teacher could access in terms of how the child is performing, right? And then they almost pivoted to a teacher-directed at-home learning model in 2022, where almost the model, the way it works is that the teacher can sort of go on Chimple. The teacher has activities which are mapped to every curriculum piece that she's teaching in the classroom, and the teacher can assign activities to the child, and the child can then open those activities on their parent's smartphone at home and do those activities. The very simple dashboard in terms of how it's performing in terms of children that are doing well, teach. And so in some ways it closes the feedback loop. So that's the model that Chimple pivoted to. And then CSF worked with Chimple to set up an evidence study, an RCT with professors from University of Virginia. And that RCT showed significant learning gains, right? So that RCT was conducted in 34 foundation schools in Haryana, and it showed a learning gain of 0.25 standard deviation for maths in grades 1 and 2, and almost a larger gain of almost 0.44 standard deviation for children, the lowest performing students, right? So what it means is that almost 10 minutes usage of Chimple over a 10-month period led to almost 1 additional year of schooling gains in some ways, right? So again, this led to more confidence in terms of the impact that Chimple could have on student learning outcomes. And post that, now CSF has been working closely with Chimple to get it adopted in one district in Ghaziabad. So again, then what we try to do is work with Chimple on getting it adopted in government schools, get it integrated into our structured pedagogy and FLN work that's happening within Ghaziabad district in UP, and where now currently Chimple is being adopted across 5 blocks within Ghaziabad district. And we are seeing early insights in terms of how sort of the program needs to evolve to get integrated into the government adoption pathway as well. And potentially now that becoming a model for scale for Chimple, where we can almost have more districts get unlocked and potentially statewide deployment for Chimple getting unlocked as part of their work.
The RCT is very promising, and it is also wonderful to know that the footprint of Chimple is also enlarging now because it is already a proven software. And also coming to your model of picking up a solution, customizing it for Indian students, and then driving adoption. Help us understand, is that the model that CSF is following based on the learning? Now there are a lot of learnings of CSF also from the realities which it has faced in its EdTech journey.
Yeah, I think that is right in some ways. I think it's not a one size fit approach, right, in some ways. So, but that's our underlying philosophy in some ways. So I think the way we almost want to work is work with the product organizations to really get the product right. I think make sure that it's contextualized in the right manner, it aligns to the curriculum that's being followed, and then almost conduct small pilots in a controlled environment and almost see how we can work to almost not just the product side but also on the program side. one thing it's important to understand is that a tech product on its own is not that can just drive learning outcomes, right? There's a whole program that needs to go around it, right? So for example, even in Chimple scenario, there's a whole elements of program in terms of how our teachers trained, how our teachers sort of trained in terms of how do they assign activities, how do they even understand these dashboards, how does monitoring happen on a regular basis, whether it's in affordable private schools or even in the government side of things. What does that look like on a day-to-day basis, right? In some ways, and there's this whole program that goes around the product, which really informs how the product gets adopted and sort of the engagement that we see. So the idea is to almost work with product organizations to really crack this and then really establish efficacy of the products, and then almost see how we can then take it to more scalable environments and see how we can then drive scalability and get it adopted in different contexts as well, with whatever tweaks might be needed on the programmatic side in some ways. And of course, product iteration is something that continues and more features can keep getting added. But then once there is confidence in terms of the product's efficacy to drive student learning outcomes, then it's about how do we sort of make sure that we can get it embedded into the government ecosystem and sort of drive scalability going forward.
Right. And I think you have this well rounded, four pronged approach. And that is why we are seeing the kind of learning gains that you have been talking about. It is not just that an edtech solution is sort of imposed on a school or a student, and then we hope for its usefulness. Your team is actually working on tweaking it as per the requirement, and then working hand in hand with the teachers and also the parents to get it adopted. One of the pillars that you had talked about was creating public goods, right? And I hear a word Tulna, which was developed in collaboration with the IITs. Help us understand this offering.
That's great. So I think so as I was mentioning earlier, right? I think from a policy perspective, there are budgets available for the governments to procure edtech from grade 6 and above, right? However, historically, what you would see is that almost majority of these procurements would focus on the hardware side of things and not really much on the learning software that goes within that hardware, right? And the rationale for that is so because it's very easy for governments to spec hardware, right? In almost even in the RFPs or in the tenders that come out, it would almost be very easy to say that this is the kind of software I want, and it's very easy to spec that. But it was that much more difficult to spec a learning software in terms of, and there not being a common definition in terms of when they were looking to procure these learning softwares, right? And in some ways, the lack of framework which informs what a good learning solution is, right? So I think that's a gap that we were seeing in the ecosystem. And as part of that, CSF partnered up with IIT Bombay to come up with EdTech Tulna, right? So Tulna, as you know, is a Sanskrit word for comparison in some ways. And I think the idea is to the idea was to come up with a framework to evaluate what good EdTech looks like, right? And here the idea is not from the perspective of its impact on student learning outcomes per se, but more in terms of product design aspects, right? So TULNA framework looks at a product from the three lenses of the technology, the pedagogy used, and the content that is being incorporated into the product, and sort of bases those three parameters, and of course, a bunch of other sub criteria within those. A product is evaluated in terms of how it is from a product design perspective, right? So again, we have developed Tulna for a bunch of different use cases, right? Like, for example, personalized adaptive learning solutions, interactive audiovisual solutions, digital classroom solutions, right? So the idea and the use cases here are two, right? So one, of course, is for product organizations to get themselves evaluated on Tulna and sort of understand how are they doing in terms of their product design and what iterations they can make to strengthen their product. And the other side is on the demand side, which is almost to now CSF is working with governments to get Tulna incorporated into some of these tender processes that governments is doing when looking to procure, right? And almost Tulna being used as a framework to evaluate learning software as part of the procurement as well, and sort of ensuring that high quality learning software gets procured along with the hardware when the procurement is being conducted by the government. So that's how Tulna came into being. So Tulna, of course, we partnered up with IIT Bombay to create this. Currently, Tulna is now housed at IIT Delhi, with IIT Bombay continuing to act as advisory and sort of guiding and shaping Tulna along with CSF in some.
Okay, that's wonderful. And if I am a school leader who is deliberating whether I should buy a edtech solution or not, can I use Tulna to evaluate that first? Is it available publicly for use?
Yeah, so Tulna is available, like all the frameworks of Tulna are completely freely available. I think we also have conducted evaluations for a host of different EdTech organizations. The evaluation reports of those are also available on TULNA website. So anybody who's looking to even sort of incorporate a learning solution within their schools or classrooms and wants to even know if they've gone through a TULNA report and want to understand how those solutions are doing on the TULNA report, that's completely freely available for anybody to go through.
Okay, so we would, for our audience, we would give a reference of this site in the show notes. Moving on from EdTech, the natural progression is AI now. And we were talking about CSF working on AI platforms also now. So there is something known as the AI Teacher Coach. So help me understand that if I am a teacher and I have never seen an AI solution, so what can I expect from this coach?
As you rightly mentioned, I think AI has come in a big way in the last couple of years, and I think it sort of unlocks some really new teaching learning experiences which probably were not possible earlier, right? And I think so our approach has been to almost look at it from a problem first perspective, where we have sort of scanned the entire landscape to look at it from a teacher side, from a parents and students, as well as a system side, in terms of what are some problems that we see on ground, and then what are certain use cases where we do see evidence of AI to almost improve learning in some ways, right? And as part of that, one of the key pieces as part of even structured PET programs is teacher coaching, right?
Okay.
Where the idea is that a teacher is supposed to receive visits by these mentor cadres or senior teachers who come to their classroom and observe their classroom and provide them feedback on a regular basis, right? And that coaching element being really important to drive student learning outcomes as part of entire structured PET programs, right? However, the reality on ground is that these visits are not as frequent as it should be. A lot of times what even happens is that because of limited bandwidth and time, even when some of these mentor cadres visit these schools, they're not able to observe the same teacher. So they have to optimize and probably visit different teachers. And what that leads to is that each teacher probably gets only 2 or 3 visits entire year, right? So as part of that, one of the things that we were trying to almost see is that can we use AI to almost build a teacher coach to give on-demand, non-judgmental feedback to the teacher for her classroom, right? And as part of that, CSF has partnered with Shikha Academy to build an AI teacher coach known as Sakhi. So the idea here is almost that can be, as I was mentioning earlier, that almost most of the teachers now have a smartphone in the classroom. So can we get the teacher to use that smartphone to record her class? And by record here, we don't mean video recording, but just audio recording of her classroom. So can we get the teacher to just record the audio of her class, and through that audio recording being fed into AI, can we give really simple feedback to the teacher on certain teaching practices that she's doing in her classroom to guide what is that she's doing really well and what is it that she can do better, right? So the current version of Teacher Coach is built to guide feedback on language teaching in Hindi, and currently it only captures the teacher voice. So given there's only one smartphone available, we are not looking at the student voice in that sense currently. So we only capture the teacher voice and provide her feedback on her teaching practices as part of a structured PED literacy class.
And what has been the feedback of teachers? Do they feel empowered by having this coach in their pocket first?
So it's been an interesting journey. So we recently conducted a pilot in Jhansi district in UP with around 50 teachers for this, and we've just recently concluded, and we are evaluating the feedback that we have received as well. But I think overall, from our on-ground insights, as I was mentioning, like initially when we went with this, there was a little hesitancy in terms of who's going to listen to my recording, where will this recording be, who will it be shared with, right? But I think overall, I think once we sort of told them this is completely just for your practice, for your feedback, I think we did see teachers adopt it and try it out. I think what we did see in an 8-week pilot that we did in Jhansi is that almost all the teachers at least did one recording per week, right? And we almost saw the teacher practices, the teacher pedagogy practices almost improving from them in sort of conducting 50% of the pedagogical steps to almost 75% pedagogical steps by the end of the pilot, right? And through the survey that we did, all 3 out of 4 teachers said that they would almost recommend Sakhi to other teachers as well, right? To use. So again, these are very early insights and a very small pilot, but I think we still need to work with more teachers and sort of get more data on this. But it's been very heartening to see teachers use AI based solution and almost receive that non-judgmental on-demand feedback and sort of use that to improve their teacher practices and sort of use that to guide how they teach in their classroom. So it's been really interesting and an exciting pilot to continue.
The word that you use there, non-judgmental, I think that is the key. The teachers have to understand and realize that they would not be penalized for not following all the structured pedagogy approach. Rather, they would be helped by positive feedback. That I think is going to drive adoption. So yeah, so that was very heartening to know, and the early pilot are promising. I hope the journey continues in this direction only. Another tool that the CSF is adopting from the AI basket is Khanmigo. So help me understand, how is it relevant for the Indian students, and is it being customized, and what has been the adoption rate and the feedback?
No, so I think again, one of the other part of our work where we saw AI being really used to leverage is personalizing the learning for the child, right? I think that's something which really AI enables, and as part of that, of course, there's a bunch of evidence globally as well as in India in terms of personal tutoring really moving the needle on student learning outcomes. So as part of that, we have partnered up with Khan Academy's Khanmigo to get it adopted in around 15 Akansha Foundation schools in Mumbai and Pune. The idea here is to almost have personal tutoring be available for the child within the classroom and for teachers to use that as part of their lessons as they use Khan Academy platform as a whole, and as part of that, Khanmigo also being available for them to use in some ways, right? So the idea with Khanmigo is much that, right, to enable that personalized support to the child. I think what we see is that as student, and in some of our, and again, it's the early stages for the pilot, but in through our field visits, what we do see is that as students are going through a Khan Academy content, I think if they are getting stuck at some stage, or if there's some conceptual understanding they're lacking, I think they are able to use Khanmigo's support to get their doubts solved, or even to help them sort of guide them through in a Socratic manner, where Khanmigo is not providing them the answer, but almost taking them through the approach to reach to the final answer, right? So I think the pilot has been done to almost uncover. I think the objective that we have with this pilot is to almost uncover what does it take for students to effectively engage with the product like Khanmigo, right? In terms of what is the kind of capacity building that might be needed to almost get them to prompt the tutor in the right manner, right? It also includes uncovering what kind of strategies need to be done with teachers to effectively have it incorporated into her classroom, and for teachers to effectively use a tool like this as well, right? I think for teacher, it's almost again like having a personal coach for her as well, right? In some ways, that sort of is enabling her to help her children learn better, and also Khanmigo's ability to provide those data points to the teacher as well in terms of how her class is doing, and for her to almost inform her teaching with that data as well, right? So again, that's how we have constructed the pilot. And again, I think through this pilot, the idea is to capture on these learnings to just inform what kind of product contextualizations, if there are any, that are needed for a product like this, and what kind of program it will take to really effectively get a product like a personal tutor adopted and sort of drive the needle on improving student learning outcomes.
And this I think is for middle school students, right?
So this is being done across grades 5 to 10.
Okay, great, 5 to 10. That's wonderful to know, and especially heartening to know that the teachers are also involved in this initiative. So we have talked about a few AI tools for teachers and for students. Is there anything for parents? Are you also guiding parents on the usage and adoption of these AI tools for their children?
So one of the pieces that CSF has been working on recently in partnership with Google.org has been on AI literacy, I think. So what we do see, and what we were seeing through our field visits as well, is that more and more teachers, students, and parents are now using AI, right? Like a lot of them use WhatsApp. Meta is already embedded within WhatsApp, right? And a lot of them are using AI without really knowing how AI works, or they're even using AI in that manner, right? So what we did see was that AI literacy is a big need currently in the country, right? And I think as part of that, CSF is working on a first of its kind AI literacy curriculum in partnership with IIT Madras, the Vadfani School of Data Science and AI. And here the idea is towards imparting AI literacy skills to teachers, parents, and students, right? And what we mean by AI literacy here is not, so the distinction here is that it's not AI skills. AI skills is essentially how do you build AI and how do you build some of these models, right? But the idea with AI literacy here is almost building the foundational understanding of what is AI, how is AI working, developing the sort of towards the broad domains of AI in terms of benefits and potential risks of using AI, right, in some ways. So I think that's the idea with this curriculum. So we have come up with a curriculum for teachers, for students, for parents, and then the idea is now to almost build an entire content stack around this to reach almost 5 million teachers, students, and parents over the next couple of years to impart these AI literacy skills.
That's wonderful to know. And this number 5 million, whenever I hear it, it is very heartening to know how many students are being positively impacted by the programs of CSF. So wonderful. And we have covered a lot of ground. We covered the 4 pillars. We talked about the various models, the tools that are available. We touched upon AI also. So if all of this keeps on happening at the pace that you people are driving, and the structured pedagogy also, which we discussed in the previous episode. So if all that happens and we continue to see the learning gain, then what is your vision for the Indian education system for 2030, year 2030? This
I
may be a
think
bit of a wishful thinking, but yes, so that drives
No,
all
I
of.
think it's a very interesting question. I think it's been really heartening to see. I think as a country, I think the focus that has come on foundational literacy and numeracy skills, especially with NEP 2020, and I think we are starting to see the learning gains with that, right? And which was what we saw in the recent ASER report, where we saw the learning curves, learning gains almost going improving even to pre-pandemic levels in some ways, right? So I think we are starting to see these green shoots of progress, as I was mentioning, right? But these are still very early days, and there's still a vast majority of the kids who are still not able to read or do simple arithmetic subtraction or division, right? So I think there's still a long way to go towards these, and I think my vision for 2030 is almost for the focus on foundational literacy and numeracy to continue to for FLN to continue to remain a priority, and sort of us working towards that, both from a in classroom perspective. Of course, there's a bunch of amazing things that are happening as part of these Nipun Bharat missions, which CSF is also working with multiple state governments on supporting to drive structured pedagogy, to drive foundational literacy and numeracy skills within the classrooms. But then there's also a huge role now which technology and specifically EdTech and AI can play here, right? And we are now starting to see evidence of EdTech in terms of improving student learning outcomes. And I think the idea would be for how do we sort of integrate this at scale? How do we get and make sure that more and more students are able to learn both within the classroom, but then also, let's say, outside the classroom on their parents' smartphone, where they're spending time on their parents' smartphone. How do we get them to learn within that time and sort of almost supplement and add to happening within the classroom and give them that additional remediation or targeted practice that they might need, right? And the idea is that potentially through all of this going forward, we are able to also unlock budgets for EdTech for primary grades as well, and sort of for EdTech to almost become more sustainable and sort of get more embedded into the government systems as well as we go forward, and potentially that leading to more and more foundational literacy and numeracy skill solutions also coming into the market.
Yeah, so you covered the entire spectrum here. I hope the vision that you have succeeds, and of course, there is greater need, greater urgency to move forward at a faster pace with support from the edtech companies and the policymakers as well. Can we move to the rapid fire section now, Abhimanyu?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Question one edtech myth you wish would disappear forever.
That access to technology is the biggest barrier for EdTech usage.
The next question. The first word that comes to your mind when you hear the word AI, when you hear
Personalized support.
one classroom gadget or tool you think every teacher should have.
The AI Teacher Coach.
Yes, we've talked about it, yes, and it's a powerful app. If you could describe the future of education in India in one hashtag, what would it be?
I take the liberty of two hashtags. I think one is which is foundation hai sahi. I think because just the focus and the importance of foundational literacy and numeracy, and the other would be sabka edtech.
Oh, wonderful. Next question. In one line, what will make you say that India is finally learning differently?
I think it's less about learning differently for me. I think it's more about learning efficiently. I think it's about, as I was mentioning, how do we get technology embedded, integrated, and get technology to aid everything that's happening within the classrooms and get them to learn more efficiently.
Oh, I love that. Next question. After working for so many years in EdTech, what is one belief that you hold more strongly than ever before?
I think it's about how technology technology can really help each and every child, irrespective of their economic background, irrespective of their learning levels. Technology can really help each and every child learn and almost pick them up from where they are and almost take them to where they need to be. So that belief, I think, is just that.
And I think you and your team is moving forward with that belief, and it's very heartening to know that, and I hope that vision really fructifies. Now moving on, what would be your message to all the teachers who are listening to us today?
I think my message would be, just that I think they are doing really, really important work for the community. I think it's about how can they continue to leverage technology, and that technology in some ways almost enabling and supporting them. I think technology is at no stage can replace a teacher, right? I think it's only about how can it almost aid the teacher and when almost build thoughtfully and integrated within their use cases and their constraints. I think so it's about how do we get technology and how do they use technology to almost optimize their work, reduce some of their workload, and almost support their children in a much better manner.
Okay, wonderful. What would be your message to the parents?
I think my message to parents would be, is just that, again, irrespective of where parents come from or what learning levels parents have, I think each and every parent can support their child to learn, right? I think the support could look different. I think it's just about how do we capacity build these parents and sort of really make them see how they can be really the learning agents in their child's learning journey, especially for kids in the younger age group where they spend a lot of time at home and interact with parents on a day in day out basis. So it's almost how do we capacity build these parents and that parents feeling much more confident and being able to support their child's learning journey as well.
Thank you for sharing that, Abhimanyu. To finish on a very hopeful note, what are you hopeful for in the Indian education system in the near future?
I think what is heartening to see, I think over the past few years, I think we have moved away from the conversation of access to learning to actually the quality of learning, right? I think just in terms of the focus that has come in terms of the learning levels that are existing in the country and how we look at those, I think that's really heartening to see. I think similarly for EdTech, I think we have moved past from the question of whether it works to almost how do we make it work in the right manner, right? And I think the fact that we are asking this question now is making me really hopeful, right? I think it's just about now almost us working together to bring it all together for the end beneficiary, right? And how do we sort of integrate it in the right manner within the constraints or the realities that we have on ground to make it really effective for each and every teacher, student, parent, everyone.
That's wonderful. Your last 2 points have really made me very hopeful of moving in the right direction. One is focusing on the quality, not just the access of education. And second is how to make these edtech solutions work, not just choosing them and putting them out, but how to make them work. And all the best to you and your team. Thanks a lot for doing this wonderful work that you are doing for each and every child in India. We are going to share the repository of the apps that the parents can use, apps that the teachers can use, and also the framework for evaluating the edtech solutions which CSF has developed. We'll share all these information in the show notes. Abhimanyu, thanks a lot for coming on the Learning Circle and sharing these wonderful insights about edtech. Thank you, Abhimanyu.
Thank you so much, Kavleen, for having me. And it's been lovely speaking to you and being on the podcast. Thank you.